In our headlines on this Wednesday afternoon, US President Joe Biden has accused Russia of genocide in Ukraine, while his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin has claimed peace talks have hit a dead end. Korea is offering fourth COVID-19 vaccine doses to those aged 60 and above, in line with efforts to boost public protection as it seeks an exit strategy. Findings for the month of March show yet another on-year rise in employment, with the medical and manufacturing arenas further expanding their workforce. Hello and welcome. It's Wednesday, April 13th here in Korea, and you're watching yet another edition of the Daily Report. President-elect Yoon is currently making public the names of more members to his incoming cabinet. Nominations for 10 ministerial posts have yet to be disclosed, including those for foreign affairs, unification and justice, but it remains unclear whether or not all 10 posts will be shared today. Earlier this past Sunday, Mr. Yoon named Chu Kyung-ho as finance minister and Lee Jong-sop as defense minister. Meanwhile, the presidential transition team has spoken of changes within the country's campaign towards carbon neutrality, highlighting the importance of nuclear power to ease our emissions. Kim Do-yeon explains.
The Presidential Transition Committee says the country's current energy policy needs significant changes, as the current President Moon Jae-in administration's policies for energy are too much of a burden for the general public. That's according to the chairman of the Planning Committee for President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol, Won Hee-ryong, and its member Kim Sang-hyuk on Tuesday as they forecast the incoming administration's energy policies. According to the committee, in 3 years, South Koreans could be paying more in electricity bills and at an exponential pace. Its forecast saw bills jumping up more than $20 a month by 2030 compared to now, and by 2035 it could be more than doubled. In addition, the committee said the rise could even lower the GDP by 0.5% annually until 2050. To avoid putting unnecessary financial pressure on the citizens, Chairman Won added that even the nation's year 2030 nationally determined contribution target of a 40% reduction in greenhouse gas could be adjusted. Among the policy changes announced to tackle the situation was the incoming administration's will to balance the use of sustainable energy and nuclear energy, something that was widely expected.
For a long time in South Korea, there has been a structure that puts sustainable energy and nuclear energy up against one another. But that shouldn't be the case. The two should each play their roles. Outside of Korea, this is called a low-carbon alliance. Just because we go one way, it doesn't mean the other one has to go by the wayside.
In the international community, countries like France are balancing green energy and nuclear energy, while Germany is even going to close its last remaining nuclear energy plant this year.
So I think it's a tough choice whether to look for the short term or the long term. I think the answer always lies in the smart mix of what's in the middle. I think that this new administration, because of what has happened in the COVID situation and the long-term requirement, they opted for kind of leaning towards more French model rather than the Germany model.
The Transition Committee says while the incoming administration is looking to mix energy policies and change some measures, its efforts towards working with the international community to achieve carbon neutrality will not change. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And Korea's efforts to ease its carbon footprints will depend significantly on the power of its technology. Here's Kim Hyun-sun.
Technology will make it easier for South Korea to inch closer to its carbon goals. The country for now has pledged to cut carbon emissions by 40% by 2030, and by 2050, zero emissions. But which technologies will be key? Korea Institute of Science and Technology Evaluation and Planning has listed its top 10. The first technology is carbon capture and utilization. This captures carbon and changes it into fuel. This technology will likely be honed in the next 10 years and is essential for the country's carbon goals. Bringing down carbon emissions in raw material production and steelmaking is also crucial in the next 10 years. Bio-based technologies and a new and improved steelmaking process will cut down unnecessary greenhouse gas emissions. Ammonia could also help cut emissions. Ammonia doesn't emit carbon when it burns, which is why it's emerging as a new alternative fuel. Upscaling the solar cell system, the electric grid, and the offshore wind power system will all help the country reach its goal. Although there seems to be some disagreement about the country's carbon goals and whether they are too ambitious, there seems to be little divide over the fact that whatever the country is aiming for, technology will help it get there faster. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
In other news, Korea's daily COVID-19 tally has dropped below the 200,000 mark, yet again, just one day after surpassing that level. Our Choi Min-jung has more on the tally, as well as on plans to offer fourth-dose vaccines to those aged 60 and above.
South Korea on Wednesday confirmed 195,419 new cases of COVID-19. The daily tally has dropped into the 100,000 range for the first time on a Wednesday in 7 weeks. The number of critical patients is on the decline, with a little over 1,000 in severe condition. There were 184 additional deaths, bringing the death toll to over 20,000.
Last week, the number of newly confirmed patients in critical condition dropped by 20% compared to the week before, and deaths dropped by over 6%.
However, the senior officials stressed that it is too early to let our guards down, with a growing number of people hiding the fact that they are infected. Authorities are also on high alert over a new Omicron hybrid variant, XL, which was first reported in the country on Tuesday. The subvariant was first detected in Britain in February. Experts say it does not appear to be a bigger threat than the original strain as of now, but said they are keeping a close watch. Meanwhile, fourth vaccine shots are set to be expanded to those aged 60 and above. Currently, fourth shots are only administered to seniors at nursing hospitals, as well as those with weakened immune systems. Health authorities said the decision comes following an increase in cases among seniors.
The proportion of infections among those aged 60 and above has increased, reaching 20%. They make up more than 85% of severe cases and over 94% of deaths.
Health authorities are also set to reveal changes on social distancing measures this Friday. The government says it will ease restrictions gradually to restore daily life and the economy. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
On the international front, accusations of genocide and of resorting to chemical weapons are making grim headlines with regard to Russia's unrelenting, aggression in Ukraine. Our Kim Sung-min has the latest on the crisis in Eastern Europe.
U.S. President Joe Biden has accused Russian President Vladimir Putin of genocide based on his forces' use of aggression in Ukraine. During his speech on domestic energy costs on Tuesday, Biden went further than any other member of his administration by using the term to describe civilian killings in Ukraine.
None of it should hinge on whether a dictator declares war and commits genocide in half a world away.
While U.S. officials have accused Russia of committing war crimes, until now, none of them had actually labeled it genocide. Biden reportedly doubled down later on in the day, telling reporters that it has become clear that evidence is mounting. He added, however, that it would be up to lawyers to decide whether or not Russia's act qualifies as genocide. As for growing claims that Russia has used chemical weapons in Ukraine, the U.S. says it was not in a position to confirm this yet. That's according to U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Tuesday, adding that the U.S. is still investigating whether Russia used chemical weapons. This follows Ukraine's earlier claim that it was checking unverified information that Russia might have used chemical weapons in the southeastern port city of Mariupol, where massive civilian killings have been reported. The city's mayor says more than 10,000 civilians have been killed in the Russian siege of the city. Meanwhile, analysis by Britain's defense ministry suggests that the fighting in eastern Ukraine will intensify over the next 2 to 3 weeks. Russia has been redirecting its offensive to Luhansk and Donetsk after retreating from around the capital, Kyiv. With attacks poised to launch soon, diplomatic hopes are seemingly fading. Speaking at a joint press conference with the president of Belarus on Tuesday, Russian President Vladimir Putin said peace talks with Ukraine had reached a, quote, dead end, adding that Russia will persist with its invasion. He also once again dismissed the evidence of Russian atrocities in Bucha as, quote, fake, claiming that the images of dead bodies had been staged by Ukraine. His remarks come as atrocities potentially committed by Russia in several cities like Bucha have come into sharper focus as more evidence is being discovered. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
Here on the peninsula, North Korea has continued to boost its missile capability by using its space program as a cover. Now, in a rare report on Tuesday, the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency claimed Pyongyang's space program provides a regime with important information that can be applied to advancing its long-range and multi-stage ballistic missiles. The agency adds North Korean hackers have been targeting aerospace firms to access valuable space and weapons technologies. Meanwhile, infringement of basic human rights continues to plague North Korea, and the U.S. continues to shed grave light on this reality. Our Kim Yo-sun has more.
Washington has criticized Pyongyang for seriously violating the human rights of its citizens. In an annual report released Tuesday, the U.S. State Department explained that human rights abuses and corruption continue to be a widespread problem in North Korea. The 2021 country report on human rights practices added that the regime failed to take credible steps to prosecute officials who committed human rights abuses or corruption. It further elaborated that there were significant human rights issues in nearly all aspects of life, ranging from respect for human integrity to respect for political and religious freedoms. The report also said that the North's parliamentary election held in 2019 was neither free nor fair. Speaking to journalists about the report, Lisa Peterson, Acting Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights and Labor, said the U.S. will continue to raise global awareness about the gross human rights violations in the North. The official also noted the fact that Washington recognizes North Korea as being among the most repressive authoritarian states in the world. She expressed hope for justice to be achieved for the people of the North. While U.S. State Secretary Antony Blinken said the reports painted a clear picture of where human rights and democracy are under threat, he did not directly mention the North's human rights conditions. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
And the European Union has blacklisted North Korea's state-owned national airline, that is, Air Koryo, for the 12th consecutive year. Now, according to an EU statement, its recently updated air safety blacklist continues to limit the operation of the North Korean airline, with just 2 planes on its fleet exempt from the ban. Separately, the EU has added 21 airlines licensed in Russia to the list, effectively banning the operation of almost all of the country's national major airlines, that is, citing their failure to meet international safety standards. This move comes as the bloc's airspace is already closed to most Russian aircraft due to sanctions imposed on Moscow. The statement also clarifies that the recent decision is not an additional sanction. South Korea's finance minister has cast doubt on the country's prospects of securing its growth target for this year. In fact, Hong Nam-gye believes the output forecast for the global economy this year will be lowered due to Omicron and the war in Ukraine. He also says inflation is likely to worsen. The government most recently forecast South Korea's economy to grow 3.1% this year and inflation to stand at 2.2%. Meanwhile, Korea's employment that is, has expanded for the 13th straight month. Findings for March show the medical and manufacturing arenas accounting for greater job opportunities. Our Lee Dae-yeon reports.
The number of people in employment in March saw the highest on-year increase last month compared to any March for the last 20 years. Data released by Statistics Korea on Wednesday shows that the number of people in jobs in March stood at over 27.7 million, a rise of more than 830,000. This was an on-year increase for each of the last 13 consecutive months. The employment rate for people aged 15 to 64 reached 67.8%, also the highest for the month of March since data was first compiled in 1989. This comes as the unemployment rate dropped 1.3 percentage points on year to 3%. In terms of the economically inactive population made up of people who have the ability to work but are not doing so due to a lack of what they see as suitable options, the figure dropped 277,000 from a year earlier to over 16.5 million, a 13th consecutive month of decline. The medical and social welfare service sector saw the greatest increase in the number of new employees, up 8.3% from a year ago. Jobs in the manufacturing sector increased some 100,000 to 4.5 million, the highest increase since January 2018. However, some in-person service sectors saw difficulties due to the spread of the Omicron variant of COVID-19. The number of people working in the wholesale and retail sectors fell by 32,000, while lodging and restaurant sectors declined 20,000 compared to the same period last year. The agency said that despite employment increases, uncertainty remains due to COVID-19 and other factors. Lee Hyun, Arirang News.
The number of students from multicultural families in South Korea has surpassed 160,000, which is a threefold increase over the last 9 years. According to the Education Ministry on Wednesday, the number of students from multicultural families attending elementary, middle and high school in the year 2021 was 160,058, a more than 240% rise compared to the year 2012. Meanwhile, the total number of students dropped 21% to just over 5.3 million over the same period, raising the ratio of students from multicultural families from 0.7% to 3%. And the city of Seoul has reportedly slashed significant amounts of greenhouse gas emissions through its green remodeling project. Now, in a press release on this Wednesday, it announced that renovations at 118 public daycare and health centers last year that cut emissions by 344 tons. Now, this means each building on average cut 17% from its yearly emissions. High-performance heating and eco-friendly ventilation systems were installed, improving energy performance and indoor air quality. Emissions from buildings was found to account for 70% of Seoul's annual emissions. The city now plans to make 1 million old buildings low carbon by the year 2026. And Seoul is playing host to a global seminar aimed at bolstering the aviation industry, a midlife that is, with COVID-19. Our Ji-young was there.
With borders reopening and international travel picking up again, the global aviation industry is gearing up for a major rebound from the COVID-19 crisis. Key decision makers and legal experts from the global aviation sector have gathered in Seoul for the 2022 International Civil Aviation Organization Legal Seminar. The three-day seminar held in Seoul is the first face-to-face meeting of its kind since the start of the pandemic, with some 800 officials from a dozen nations exploring how to move forward in the post-pandemic era. Governed by the UN, the ICAO, which is made up of 193 member countries, got the seminar underway on Tuesday in cooperation with South Korea's Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport. The goal is to facilitate a quick and full return to pre-pandemic air traffic levels, but with safe protocols in place.
We need to promptly recover the harmonization of the requirements for international travel and be able to give assurances to governments, health authorities, the traveling public, that the protocols in place cover sufficiently the need or the risks that are generated and are safe.
The Secretary General also congratulated South Korea on 70 years in the ICAO. At the event, the Minister of Land, Infrastructure and Transport noted the aviation industry's efforts that have been in place to cope with the pandemic.
For the recovery of the aviation industry, governments around the world have come up with many support measures, including financial aid. They have also eased restrictions to turn grounded passenger fleets to transport cargo. And to overcome the struggles and keep the aviation network alive, countries have created travel bubbles.
He added that South Korea, ranking 5th globally in terms of aviation traffic volume, will continue to help boost cooperation. The country plans to secure an 8th term at the ICAO Council to contribute more for the advancement of the aviation industry. 엄지영, Arirang News.
The clearer the image, the earlier the diagnosis, and this reality in itself would also allow for prompt medical attention in the case of neurological diseases. Well, this is precisely what a group of researchers at one local university are aiming for. Our Yoon has more.
For decades, the MRI has been classed as a state-of-the-art medical imaging technique that accurately diagnoses diseases in the brain, spinal cord, or cartilage. One of its greatest advantages is that unlike X-rays or CTs, MRIs do not use ionizing radiation and instead use a strong magnetic field and radio waves, allowing it to be considered a non-invasive procedure. After comparing images from a 3 Tesla MRI used in most hospitals with a 7 Tesla MRI used in research centers, it's been proven that the stronger the magnetic field, the clearer the image. And now at the Gov't University Gil Medical Center, they've successfully developed a core component of MRI that reaches 11.74 Tesla, allowing images that are 10,000 times more detailed than the 3 Tesla MRIs that are most commonly used in medical environments.
Overall, this magnet currently shows the highest Tesla value in the world.
A technical team from Italy and a team of domestic evaluation advisors confirmed that this new development in magnetic field technology hits all targets in terms of strength, internal temperature, and uniformity of the generated magnetic field.
Gathering images from animals and humans, this technology will be the basis for a platform that can diagnose the world's most minute brain disease.
Once completed, this 11.74 Tesla MRI is expected to bring breakthrough results in the treatment of diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's that are currently incurable. The Gov't Institute of Brain Science has been developing the 11.74 Tesla MRI with the Ministry of Health and Welfare since 2014 and plans to produce the world's most detailed and clear images of the brain by the end of the year. 이은진, Arirang News.
Korea's Omicron wave is on a tangible decline, and this reality is now triggering fresh debate over the course of our future strategy against COVID-19. For more, I have Professor David Kwak from Suncheon University. Professor Kwak, welcome back.
Good afternoon.
I also have Professor Kim Moon-kyu from Yonsei University. Professor Kim, it's good to have you here.
Thank you.
Professor Kwak, let's begin with your thoughts on recent reports about the XL variant here in the country, which I understand is just one of some 17 combinations of the Omicron's 2 sublineages BA1 and BA2.
Right, as you mentioned, there are many different subvariants that are currently happening. The newly found XL seems to be one of them, and that was the first one to be found in Korea. When we talk about such subvariants, we're mainly talking about the subvariants that happen from the combination of either Delta and Omicron, or subvariants of these the variant Omicron itself. So, namely, XL seems to stem from BA1 and BA2 variants of the Omicron, and I think it was originally named BA2.2. But XD seems to have stemmed from the combination of Delta and Omicron and so on. It sounds a little bit confusing, and I don't remember all 17 subvariants of their names, but XF and XE also happens to be the subvariants of Omicron. The point that I want to get out of this is that the variants that are happening and seems to possibly happen in the future would most likely be the subvariants of Omicron itself. And I take this very positively, because Omicron itself was known to cause relatively less severity in patients and also possibly in lower numbers of deaths compared to the prior variants. And as we expect to see even further variants of such less severe causing virus variant, I'm hoping that it'll create possibly faster transmissible variants, but hopefully even further less severe and less less death-causing variants as well. So if we look at that person, one case that happened in Korea, the XL, the person was not only have received 3 inoculations of vaccines and is currently showing no symptoms whatsoever. I think that is also good news, but also the fact that the XL variants that happened in overseas has not caused that much of a big deal either yet. So I'm hoping and I'm having my fingers crossed that it'll continue to be that way, but also for the future variants, obviously further studies would have to be needed, but I'm hoping that it'll stay mild and also less casualty as well.
Right. And staying with the situation here in the country, Professor Kim, the number of patients in critical condition remains on the 1,000 level, and the daily losses of lives continue to hover on the triple digits. Having said that, what are your thoughts with regard to our current situation? Is it under control?
I would say that it's barely under control. Current status is a result of 2 weeks prior patient situation. And usually the patient starts with mild symptoms, and some they recover, some become critically ill. And after 2 weeks, we know that this patient was infected about 2 weeks ago, who needs treatment in ICU beds. And the total number of cases is decreasing, and we can carefully expect that 2 weeks later, this critical cases might decrease also. But anyway, still, this huge number is a big burden to intensive care units. And it's not just only for the intensive care unit. I mean, the total medical facilities are outstretched, and all the manpowers are getting overloaded. So, and that can result in a less chance for critical patients to get proper treatments. All the emergency departments are busy. We have to wait for a phone call calling from various hospitals asking for beds, and sometimes we have a delay, and those delay might result in a critical result. So I would say it's barely controlled, and I hope that this number will decline week by week.
Right. And against that backdrop, Professor Kwak, the government, for its part, it's looking to lower its classification of COVID-19 from a Class 1 infectious disease to a Class 2. First then, what are the implications of this downgrade on the treatment front?
Well, I'm not entirely sure what the implications will be, formally speaking, because if we go through the examples of what are differences of the diseases that are classified in either classification level 1 or level 2, obviously, by definition, the diseases that belong to classification level 1 is a disease that can cause threat to the national health system. And it needs to be reported to the government immediately if one's found. But also, classification level 2 does not differ that much, but it differs in the sense that it needs to be reported within 24 hours of finding. But other than that, there are overlappings of monitoring and management of diseases that belong to each of the classes. People will be known pretty soon of the examples of what belong there. So other than the formality and the title, I don't think it differs that much registratively speaking, by downgrading the classification. I guess the only biggest difference that we'll visually see is the fact that rather than having to trace it numbers by one by daily confirmation cases, I guess having it to report within 24 hours would put it in a situation where reports will be made rather weekly than daily. But other than that, people are currently worrying that if it goes down to the level 2, the national insurance system will not cover the fees for the tracings and testings for COVID-19. But that has yet to be decided by the government, and it's quite uncertain whether or not that'll be true. So we'll have to wait and see. But other than for that purpose, really downgrading or even upgrading back from level 2 to level 1, I don't think will make that much of a difference in a clinical sense.
Right. But in the meantime, Professor Kim, I understand that a change in the classification of an infectious disease also allows for its treatment at any local clinic as opposed to a designated medical center. Having said that, is that measure safe when you're considering the traits of COVID-19?
Well, I have the answer yes and no. And I would say that we had a good strategy against COVID-19 since it started from Wuhan until the Delta variant. But the emergence of Omicron make this strategy not efficient. I mean, Omicron variant has a high R number, reproduction number, and that's the reason we had this high number of cases right now. This Omicron is transmitting so fast, and thankfully it's not that devastating, not a high mortality. So that's one of the reasons that pushes the government to change this level 1 to level 2, and if you belong to level 2, you don't need more, negative rooms to prevent transmission. Anyway, if we had this outbreak with Delta variant, it would be very devastating, but thankfully it was because of Omicron, so we didn't have that high rocketing cases of mortality. So it is somehow safe to go to the clinic, even though there might be a Omicron patient infected with Omicron. But still, you have to be careful with the elderly and having underlying conditions. So now it's the portion of the people, the patients, they have to take care of themselves. The government is opening the clinics to take care of all the patients, and you have to protect yourself. You have to wear masks, hand washing, and try to keep distancing from possible infected people. So that makes the ball go to the people with elderly and underlying conditions.
Right. And a greater sense of autonomy and a sense of responsibility for patients themselves then.
Yes.
Professor Kwak, a further lowering in the classification of COVID-19 will reportedly allow for the lifting of the mandatory isolation period for COVID-19 patients, which is currently the case over in England. What are your thoughts on the wisdom of this particular measure?
Well, that's the particular issue that I was referring to when I mentioned that there is an overlapping of management techniques that actually resides in both the classes, either class 1 or class level 2. The fact that we have currently the influenza virus stationed in the classification level 1, and to my knowledge, I think tuberculosis still belongs to classification level 2. The reason I'm bringing these two examples up is because even though, despite influenza being the classification level 1, it is not mandated that people be quarantined when having influenza. People concurrently taking Tamiflu, managing themselves, are not legally mandated to stay home for certain numbers of days. As opposed to tuberculosis, if you are infected and if you're diagnosed, you are, I wouldn't say legally, but maybe legally, but at least clinically speaking, they are mandated to stay within a hospital facility in a negative pressure room until they're treated for a certain period of time and they're clinically better. And then they're discharged to keep on taking certain medications. So the changing of the classification, the lifting of the mandates for quarantine is yet to be decided for SARS-CoV-2, obviously, but I don't think it'll depend on the classification of this virus, but rather, as Dr. Kim already said so, it'll depend on the mortality rates and the numbers of severe cases that it'll further cause in the future when there are occurrences of more variants. And it's really, I don't think it will be clinically titled by the classification, but more by the nature and the fashion of transmissibility. So we have to really focus rather what's more important? I don't think classification in this matter should be more important than the nature of the virus itself.
Right. Professor Kim, authorities are also reportedly looking into the possibility of lifting outdoor face mask requirements while mandating them indoors, of course. But some health experts believe this lack of consistency, if you will, may lead to possible confusion and conflict. What are your thoughts?
Yes, it's causing confusion, but personally, I agree that the wearing mask outdoors is not that necessary right now. If we know all the information about COVID-19 at the beginning of this pandemic, I think we didn't have to wear masks outdoors. But 2 years ago, we didn't know about this virus, so we had to wear masks indoors and outdoors. Right now, all the instructions given by authorities is based on scientific evidence, and the necessity of wearing masks outdoors is not that strong compared to indoors. So we have to wear masks indoors, but outdoors, even at the beginning of the pandemic, the CDC in the United States was confusing. We had to wear masks or not. They were not so clear at that point. So if we meet another pandemic within a few years, I think we might have to wear masks even outdoors at the beginning of the pandemic, because we don't know how it's going to work out. So yes, now it's time we have the information. Now I agree that we can start wearing masks outdoors, but under some conditions that we are not so crowded. The people, if they gather too crowded, still you might have to wear a mask. And if we keep distance, now I think we can relax on those things. And if somebody is coughing, then you have to be careful. So in the conclusion, I mean, you have to bring a mask anywhere you go. You might have to wear it when you go indoors. And when you come out, and if you are far from 1 meter distance from other people, then I think you don't need to wear a mask anymore. Right. Now it's the era of Omicron, not the Wuhan strain.
Right. And staying with mask mandates, Professor Kwok, when do you suppose will it be possible for us to lift the indoor requirement as well?
That's a very tough question, actually. I don't think anytime in the near future we're going to see ourselves actually taking off the mask, especially in the indoors. I think there is also a factor of cultural differences or cultural diversity that different countries would approach the same matter very differently. I believe in the US there are differing states that actually has a very different approach to taking off the mask inside. I believe some of the states in the US are currently not mandating even the students going to schools to wear their mask once inside the classes, but some of the states are actually keeping the mandates on them. At this state, as Dr. Kim also mentioned, once again, there is that level of uncertainty regards to what will happen in the future in the subvariants of the current Omicron variant of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Meaning, currently we know for a fact that it won't cause too much trouble even if we took off our mask on the outside. On the inside, we have to be a little bit more careful so it stays on, but hopefully in the future when it becomes more weak, then we'll be able to take it off. But with that level of uncertainty, there's still that little chance that it might become more severe again. It might become more dangerous again. In that case, we would have to start wearing the mask back up. So that point of time, it's really tough to estimate. I don't know when it will happen or what will happen of it, but if we experience enough time period with the lack of severity from the SARS-CoV-2 and the safety that we would have by keeping the distancing guidelines we currently have, I think we'll gradually be able to take it off, even if not guided by the government itself. So I foresee possibly in the few months let's say 3 to 4 months afterwards, people will start talking about maybe lifting the mandates on the mask on the indoors. But I hope that for our own safety, this would not be just for SARS-CoV-2, but it also applies to many other diseases, respiratory transmissible diseases. It is still better to keep the mask on at this point.
Right. It really is a difficult question, the million-dollar question right there. I'll give you an easier one right now. Professor Kwok, how do you respond to potential plans or efforts that is currently underway to scale back on COVID-19 testings?
Right. That's also a very good point, a good issue to talk about, actually. We have to think about the purpose and the requirement for the massive scales of testing we currently have. Originally, 2 years back, when we were having Wuhan strains of viruses, we needed massive numbers of testing in order to trace everyone back. But as we see already within even the changes of patterns that are happening throughout the week, a few weeks back, we would have, let's say, higher numbers on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Now we're seeing even lower numbers on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, but possibly higher numbers on Monday. What does that tell us? I think, personally, clinically, it tells us that the perception people are having towards Omicron has changed so greatly that they're no longer taking it as a huge threat. But they need the formal excuse of having COVID-19 that'll exempt them from certain works or a certain occasion. That's why they need to take the exam or take the test before Monday or sometime early on in the week. And this is my wild guess, so I might be completely wrong on this. But if we follow that logic, the scale of the testing, I don't think is as required as it used to back 2 years ago. So I think it sort of prevails or allows the government to have the excuse to actually lift these mandates of the massive numbers of testing. I think those people, just like we did with influenza virus, those people who are symptomatic, who needs treatment, or who are more vulnerable to the disease but without a symptom, should be tested, and those should possibly remain required. But for other cases where they're obviously going to go through much less severe cases and not so worrisome in regards to the disease, I don't think we'll have to go through all the contact tracing and also these massive numbers of consecutive tests. So I think it might be feasible and quite possible that the government will soon enough take off or lift the mandates for massive numbers of testing.
Right. And moving forward, Professor Kim, COVID-19 vaccination currently is covered by the government here. Do you suppose it should continue to be cost-free for the public to ensure greater participation if inoculations become an annual affair?
Well, I do agree that if it's for free, if the government covers financially, it has a positive impact on general health, public health situation. But fund is limited always, and we have to consider what the positive impact and the negative impact. If, as Professor Kwok mentioned, if there's no more variant causing severe disease, just spreading, the reason for the government to cover all this fund is weakening. But actually, there's no guarantee that the future corona variant is going to be mild. There's some chance that we might encounter some kind of a Delta variant with high transmissibility. And then I think that will be the reason, pushing reason that the government might have to cover financially, and it will cover the whole population. And if it's not, I hope that this fund for public health will go to those places necessary. And one more thing I would like to mention is that the vaccine studies in Korea, domestic vaccine studies, didn't have an impressive result till now. And I hope that we can make a success story, a Korean success story of vaccine development in this COVID and also for the future pandemics. So I wish the government has some idea to save some money for those areas.
Right, we'll keep our fingers crossed for that definitely then. Professor Gov't, very briefly speaking, vaccine uptake among children remains quite low. Having said that, what can the government do to address this reality, to boost vaccinations among children here in the country?
It's really giving information very clearly, coming out lucid about what's happened with the vaccines and what it helped, what kinds of people it helped and what kinds of people it did not help as much. Obviously, we're seeing great benefits in those who are vaccinated, especially in the elderly, but there are also happen to be children who did benefit from receiving vaccines, who did not go through severe cases. As we expect to see much higher transmissibility and more cases that are happening in children, because obviously children gather more and they're in school situations and whatnot, they are the ones also who can also benefit from receiving vaccines. And I believe the only way that the government can actually reach the goal of higher rates of vaccination among children is really giving a clear information, whether that be really just a positive sign or a negative sign. They have to come out very neutrally about the information.
Right, so raise awareness then basically.
Exactly.
All right, Professor Kwak, as always, thank you very much for your thoughts. And Professor Kim, thank you very much for your insights today.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. A masked gunman set off a smoke bomb and opened fire in one of New York City's subway cars. The shooting occurred near the city's 36th Street station on the N train during New York's morning commute on Tuesday. 10 people were shot, with 29 people treated at nearby hospitals for their injuries. Authorities have said that they are looking for a person of interest who rented a truck they say is connected to the shooting. Video footage of the scene showed smoke pouring out of an arriving train car, with riders struggling to flee the scene. Police said that the shooting isn't currently being investigated as a terrorist act, and it comes as the city has witnessed a string of gun-related violence over the past few months, including attacks on its transit system. Turning over to South Africa, where the country's eastern coastal province, KwaZulu-Natal, is seeing heavy flooding following days of torrential downpours. According to reports on Tuesday, at least 45 people have been killed and dozens are missing, with fears that the number of casualties may be even higher. Homes and roads have also been swept away by floods and mudslides, with evacuation efforts underway in disaster-prone areas. Power generation capabilities have also been compromised as local dams filled beyond capacity, limiting hydroelectric generators. South Africa's weather service said downpours will weaken on Wednesday, but rain will return at the weekend. In January, floods in the coastal city of East London killed 10 people and left hundreds homeless. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Finance Minister Rishi Sunak were handed fines on Tuesday for breaking COVID-19 lockdown rules, making Johnson the first sitting Prime Minister to be sanctioned for breaking the law. The penalties follow an investigation by authorities into illegal parties at Downing Street that broke social distancing rules. So far, more than 50 fines related to the controversy have been handed out, with more expected. Johnson has since spoken out on the matter, saying that it had not occurred to him that he was in breach of the rules for what was a brief gathering with co-workers, and that he paid the fine. The European Space Agency on Tuesday officially opened a new center for space safety in the town of Darmstadt in Germany, with the goal of averting danger and facilitating security for essential infrastructure in space. Located in the same area as the European Space Operations Center, the new facility will monitor satellite instruments that measure space weather, which are cosmic events that affect Earth like solar storms. According to scientists, damage caused to sensitive instruments by such events can result in costs of over $16 billion and may affect electronics in space and even here on Earth. The facility will also provide an opportunity for young engineers in the field to practice their skills. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good Wednesday afternoon. Spring rain is soaking the country. Now that the temperatures are going to cool back down to normal, well, slightly less than normal, and relieve the dryness, we should just welcome it. So the question is, how much rain can we expect? So Jeju will see up to 60 millimeters of rain, and other regions will see 5 to 40 millimeters. Thunder and winds might rattle windows in a few places, and rain can turn into snow in colder mountain areas of Gangwon-do province with 1 to 3 centimeters. Road conditions might not be good, so get ready to slow down and leave a bit earlier if you have to be on time or have some obligations. And as far as the temperature is concerned, with a cold air mass moving into the country, it's getting much colder than yesterday. So highs will take a big tumble by nearly 10 to 20 degrees Celsius in most regions. And Seoul will be seeing 14, Daegu 15, and Gyeongju 13. But by later this week, after the rain fizzles out, temperature will rise again and the dry weather will continue. And let's take a look at worldwide weather conditions.
And that ends this edition of the Daily Report. We'll be back same time tomorrow. That is Thursday. Join us then. Thank you for now.